Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Gerard.
Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven. Today our special guest is Linda Trinh, and Linda is a Vietnamese Canadian author who writes nonfiction and fiction for adults and children. She explores identity, cultural background, and spirituality. Seeking Spirit, a Vietnamese non-Buddhist memoir, is published by Guernica Editions, MiroLand. Her creative nonfiction has appeared in literary magazines such as the Fiddlehead Room, Prairie Fire, and This Magazine. Her short fiction has appeared in anthologies such as Black Cat Anthology and Alternate Plane Stories of Prairie Speculative Fiction. She has been nominated for 2 National Magazine Awards. Her award-winning early chapter book series, Nguyen Kids, explores Vietnamese culture and identify with elements of the supernatural, spirituality, and spiritual and social justice woven in. She lives in Winnipeg with her family. So welcome, Linda.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started writing?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I'm Vietnamese Canadian. My family came to Vietnam when I was 3 years old, and it was myself, my mom and dad, and my older sister. My father passed away when I was 7, and so I was raised by a single parent with my older sister, kind of in the west end of Winnipeg. And those experiences really informed and inspired the kind of things that I write about. And I think I always knew growing up that I wanted to be a writer. Um, that was not necessarily the dream of my mother, wanting me to be like a doctor or a lawyer. So I did go to university for business. I got a real job, as she would call it, stable income, paying the bills. And I always still had this desire to write. And yeah, thank you so much for reading out my bio. It's kind of come organically. I've taken different classes through university and online, having this want still, and then yeah, publishing in different literary magazines, doing fiction, writing for children as well, and now with this memoir. So for me, it feels like this evolution of myself as a writer.
So tell us a little bit about your books, Seeking Spirit, and what inspired this.
Yeah, it's called a Vietnamese non-Buddhist memoir. So it is about my life. Childhood is in there, a little bit of young adulthood, myself right now, and my life. Really, it's about this idea for me of spirituality, and what that looks like for me is like a personal spiritual road that I was kind of around me was Buddhism, and we would go to temple once or twice a year. But as I was looking into it, I still would not consider myself a Buddhist. Growing up Vietnamese, there's the Vietnamese tradition of ancestor veneration, so having altars to ancestors who passed away. And so that was always swirling around me. So I was trying to find my spiritual foundation with those pieces around. But then also, I was a curious child. So I wanted to know more about world mythology. And then being curious, I also wanted to travel. So the book also has different parts of the world that I go to: Egypt, Vietnam, China, and seeking out sacred spaces, but then also being so surprised and thrilled that they held such meaning for me. So yeah, so the memoir itself is just kind of my life and how I try to find meaning and extraordinary moments in my ordinary life.
So, I mean, obviously, you've lived more than a year or 2 here. So, like, how do you pick the events to include in a memoir?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because for me, it was trying to find meaning, right? So, like for example, like the last part. So I think back to Buddhism, and I talk about mandala, mudra, and mantra. And so there's this exploration of, well, what does that, doing the research for it, but then also how does it relate to my life? And so I find that the people that I love most, like the women that I love most and the men that I love most, populate that space. And how do I talk about that? And then mantra, just trying to find my way as an author, as a creative person, how does that all fit together? So yeah, I mean, it's a good question of like which moments to put in, but also that's how it came. That's how it came about. Like finding the structure of the memoir, then it informed, well, what pieces I'm going to put into it.
Now, did you have a favorite place? You mentioned it was all over the world.
I mean, going to Egypt was such an amazing time period, going to see the Sphinx, the pyramid, um, Abu Simbel. I would say, though, I have been to Vietnam several times, been lucky enough to do so. And everything is always a little different. I notice something different. I'm different. The country seems different. So I would say my favorite place, and I mean, it's on the cover of the book, um,
Oh,
is Ha Long Bay. So that's in northern Vietnam. And I do write about it in the book itself. It's the most magical place, if I can describe it, where it's all these beautiful islands and you're going around by boat, but it's also misty. And I would say it's the place where the real world meets the divine world.
oh, that sounds so beautiful. I was like,
It
oh,
is.
we should look into that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so how long did it take you to write this book? And then what did you do with it afterwards? Was it part of like a class exercise or?
That's such a good question. Um, it took me, I wrote this book I started writing pieces of it over 10 years ago. And in the book, I describe my daughter being born and then going back to my day job after maternity leave with her. My daughter is now 13.
Mhm.
So some of the events, obviously they're childhood events, but then there's a period of time I talk about trying to grow my family. And that happened a long time ago. So it took me 7 years, I would say, from writing some of the pieces to revising the book. And I did a lot of chunks of the book through different mentorships. I did a mentorship through the Manitoba Writers Guild, and that was one on one. I would submit assignments, and my mentor would give me feedback about them. And that was really some of the essays that started. And then a few years after that, I did a mentorship with Diaspora Dialogues, and that was for 6 months. It was virtual, but I really think at that point, that's when all the essays and the pieces came together through some kind of structure. And then Diaspora Dialogues also supported me to have an editing revision process with Shaylee Knight. So it's taken a lot of drafts, it's taken a lot of time uh, to reflect and to find it. So then I had a manuscript ready
Mhm.
to query. So I did go through querying process that probably took me a year and a half to find the publisher. And before that, I had to like the manuscript was ready, and then I had to write the book proposal, and that is a different kind of writing, I would say. You're doing all this creative writing, and then it's moving into business writing. Well, you're not looking at it from the viewpoint of the author anymore. You're looking at the viewpoint of the reader. So, what is the audience? Who will this appeal to? What is the book about, and how can you describe it? Um, so, I did try to query agents first in Canada, and some agents did ask for um, to look at the full manuscript and to review it. Ultimately, that didn't work out, and so I was submitting it to independent publishers, and I was thrilled that Guernica Editions gave it a chance. I did get feedback from agents and from publishers that the writing was strong, and I just don't know if they were sure about the topic, about the idea of spirituality. And again, for me, that's different than talking about institutional religion, but they weren't quite sure about the theme of it.
I mean, you could have chosen to just write a memoir without it. Like, why was it important for you to include that?
No, that's a good question. I think for me, that is the central question. Like whether I write for kids or for adults, I think that I write about the same kinds of things. So identity, culture, but it always has these questions around spirituality. It still always has this exploration of what is real, what is not real, what is ordinary, what is extraordinary. So to me, that's what made me come back to the memoir. That's what made me come back to the manuscript to try to finish it, to um, you know, put down in writing this exploration. And it's my unique experience. And like with any kind of published writing, I'm hoping that my unique experience will be relevant to readers who are also on their own personal journeys and what that looks like for them.
Now you've published before, like your other things, like can you tell us a little bit about your nonfiction and speculative fiction?
Yeah, thank you. I have had essays published before in literary magazines. Some of them became chapters of the book. And so I published the first chapter is called Incense and Ancestors, and that was published in Prairie Fire some years ago. And that is my connection to ancestor veneration and also historical mythological figures, the Trunk sisters, and finding a relationship to that. So again, there's always a quality of the past, of the divine, what that means. I also published, I think it's the third chapter, Gates and Goddesses in the Fiddlehead. And it's again this idea of what does my journey look like to me? And so the structure of it is how I am journeying with Inyana, who is a Sumerian goddess, into the underworld and the gates of which I have to pass. And so for me, trying to find the structure of it, Inyana has to remove pieces of her identity, pieces of clothing as she goes through these gates. And so I felt that that was something I had to do as well, unlearning certain things that I thought about spirituality, about myself, and learning different pieces of it through heartbreak, through trauma, just through life to be able to do that. And then the fiction that I write, there's always a component of legend, of Vietnamese legend as well. And I want to leave it open. Eggshells has the is a short story in an anthology. It's the origin story of the Vietnamese people of coming from an egg, and 100 people, 50 go with their mother, 50 go with their father. And I hope to write it in such a way that what does this all mean? What is the truth? What is the meaning of all this? So yeah, just for people to think of things in different ways, and that how do we know what is real and not real?
Now, I'm actually not very familiar with Vietnamese mythology. Like, do you have any like famous stories? You know how like Chinese mythology they always talk about the Monkey King? Like, is there something
Yes,
like
yes.
that similar in Vietnamese culture?
Yes, yeah, familiar with the Monkey King. I think my mom and my sister used to watch the 26 videotapes of like the
Yeah.
series that was made in the 80s. Um, well, it's really interesting because I had to learn these myths myself, like having basic knowledge of Vietnamese and yeah, coming to this country. I I bought them at the bookstore myself. It's like traditional, stories, Vietnamese children's stories or something like that, right? But then when I would go to Vietnam, some of these things made sense, right? It's like, oh, like what's on TV? That's that, you know, that's that myth
Mhm.
that is happening. Or even going to the amusement park. Oh, they're basing it on like the levels of hell. Uh, and
Oh boy.
yeah, right. That's like, oh, so we're going through all these different. So it's very embedded in the culture, I find. And then myself living in North America, that's part of the journey, being part of the diaspora, kind of figuring it out myself.
How old were you when you came over?
I was 3.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Then it's almost like you pretty much grew up like as an outsider in a way, because I grew
Yeah,
up, I was born here, so whenever I go back to Hong Kong, it's like
yeah,
I can pass speaking, but I can't write. So you
yes.
could tell I'm an imposter at one point. So
Yeah, that is definitely a theme that we use through the book as well. Not being enough of something or being too much of something. Because I was born there, coming here. I went to Vietnam on vacation for the first time when I was 9, and then throughout my life. But people always knew that
yeah,
I was overseas Vietnamese. They could just look at me and they knew, right? I didn't even have to
yeah.
open my mouth. And once that happened, then for sure they knew. So yes, so that idea of like, what does belonging mean or what does identity mean when you're caught in between cultures, and culture being also like spiritual practices as well as food, family, all those different aspects. And so for me, um, that's what I was most curious about. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, is there anything you're working on right now, or?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to mention as well, like writing for kids. So this is the first book of my Nguyen Kids series. And so there are 4 books in that series. And it's the same kind of, there's also spirituality in it. It follows a Vietnamese Canadian family, the 3 siblings, and they are given magical gifts from their grandma Noi, who has passed away from their ancestor. And they talk about like tricky topics for kids, racism, gender identity, but also this kind of like link to the past and this idea of what's real, what's not real, what does that mean? And so now I'm doing another series for kids called the Legendary Ally series with the same publisher, Anik Press. And it'll be high fantasy based on Vietnamese mythology. So the 4 mythological creatures. So um, dragon, phoenix, turtle, and lung. So I'm deep into that right now. And I always, have an idea for a second memoir, of course. There's always interesting real life things that happen. And then, trying to make meaning, make sense out of it, right?
Cool. Linda, you're going to do a reading for us. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're reading before you start?
Great, thank you. I'm going to be reading the first part of chapter 1, Incense and Ancestors. And really, it's kind of like an introduction into the world of ancestor veneration and a glimpse of, kind of my life as a kid and how that informed what the rest of the book is about. Growing up, it was my job to clean Ba's altar every month, sweeping away dust, sweeping away gray ashes from the incense holder, sweeping away last month's prayers and wishes. My dad peered through his black and white photo behind glass while I worked. Standing on a kitchen chair so I could reach the altar on top of the wall unit, I dusted the 2 plastic candles. Red candles, each topped with a red light bulb to simulate candlelight. The 2 stood guard on either side of his framed photo. I wiped down the red and gold incense holder in front of his picture, maneuvering around the spot where the real incense went and around the 3 joss sticks made of plastic, each complete with a minuscule glowing bulb. I always tried to clean the black singe mark on the middle plastic joss stick, never surprised that month after month the stain remained. I was 7 when he died. I woke up to Ma lying beside me and Jen. Ba muck was all my mom said. Dad's lost. She cried into my shoulder, short bursts of sound dampened by silence. She swallowed her grief as it began to bubble up inside her, trying to stop it before it got away from her. I imagined her fists were clenched in the darkness. Her tears were wet on my pajamas, and I shivered. Jen was turned away from us on the bed, her form shaking on the well-worn mattress. I don't remember crying. I must have. The bed was hot and cramped, yet I felt as if I was encased in ice, apart from them. I would have liked more words from Ma, words to comfort my little child mind, words to help me, words to make it bearable. I had never visited him in the hospital, and I never said goodbye. Ma made offerings to Ba and to all the ancestors, on death anniversaries and at the Lunar New Year, and every new moon. She gomed with flowers and food. There was fruit, if nothing else. She made offerings to our loved ones who had passed beyond the land of the living. Ma lit incense in front of Ba's altar. My mom's palms pressed a fragrant joss stick between them in front of her heart. With prayers on her lips and eyes focused, she peered through the earthly objects into the spirit world. She bowed her head 3 times. Gong happened once a month, at a specific time, but I didn't know much about the cycles of the moon growing up. I'd be nervously searching through the fridge for fruit to eat. Ma, have the apples been gonged? No, don't touch them, she'd yell in Vietnamese. I'd shut the door quickly and jump away from the fridge. I didn't mean to touch them. Eating ungonged fruit felt like the ultimate sin, like I was stealing out of the ancestors' own mouths. On gong days, Ma scurried around the house, around the kitchen before the sun came up, slamming drawers and clinking dishes with extra vigor to ensure her daughters dared not sleep in. She was the chef and house manager, and I was the server and dishwasher. 3 place settings at Ba's altar, 3 place settings at the dinner table, 5 place settings at the coffee table. Who these place settings were for was something I didn't know. I laid out a bowl of rice, chopsticks, tea and Coke, small bowls of fish sauce or soy sauce, some with chilies and some without, at each place setting. I set out platters of fresh apples and oranges and other fruit in season. The menu would change. It could be vegetarian or meat-friendly, egg rolls, fish maw soup, chicken curry, stir-fried noodles, and dessert of layered gelatin or cassava cake would sometimes be served. Tomato stuffed with tofu or rice paper wraps were my favorite. I brought the food from the kitchen and did my arrangement. When Ma came to do her final inspection, she always rearranged what I did. No, the curry should be next to the fish. The fruit should be at the head of the table. Once she was sure the ancestors would be pleased, she lit the joss sticks and said her prayers. We were only allowed to eat after the incense burned away completely. I sat in the kitchen wondering, was the incense an invitation to the meal? Was that how our family knew to stop their wanderings and come to our house? Or were they always with us, and the incense, the vehicle with which they would consume the offerings? Did kids who grew up in Filipino or Indigenous or Ukrainian homes in Winnipeg have questions about their rituals too? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know. Every time I hear Winnipeg, it sounds so cold. But
It is. It does
okay.
get cold. Yes.
Well, thank you very much for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
For more upcoming episodes of the Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit us at jfgarage.com/arpodcast. A reminder to Patreon subscribers that there is bonus content available for every episode on the Patreon website. If you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee. The Artsy Raven is produced by J.F. Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and music is by Tim Moore. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe.